The Supreme Court's wrapping up its final month of this term with a series of rulings. Joining us now to discuss those decisions and what's next for the court is Constitutional Accountability Center President Elizabeth Wydra and Mark Smith, a constitutional attorney and senior fellow at King's College. Welcome to both of you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Mike.
Let's start with an Arizona voting rights case, whether Arizona's out of precinct policy, which does not count provisional ballots cast in person on Election Day outside of the voter's designated precinct, violates Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. Elizabeth, start us off.
Yeah, so what you ended with, Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, is really what I'm going to be looking at in this case. You know, the actual laws themselves, which might be written in race-neutral terms, can be seen to have an effect that causes communities of color, voters of color, to have less of a possibility of electing the person of their choice. And under the traditional test under the Voting Rights Act, that is a violation. Our Constitution sets up an inclusive, multiracial democracy, and the voting rights is a crucial part of how that is enforced. But even if these particular laws fall, I think what I'm going to be looking at is how robust the Supreme Court endorses Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act and that test that makes sure that voters of any race whatsoever can make sure that they have a real meaningful voice at the ballot.
All right, Mark, what's your take?
Well, I think actually we're at a critical moment in American law, Mike, if you think about it. I mean, the Amy Coney Barrett court, if you will, she's only been on the court for about 7 months. So we're really going to start to get a glimpse of where the Supreme Court's going to be going on not just voting right laws, but also other issues like the Second Amendment and abortion. And what's very interesting is, remember, we just had the 2020 census, which means that coming up, we're going to have, over the next couple years, a series of redistricting efforts, people drawing new lines based on the new census totals. And this case is really going to tell us a lot about how the Supreme Court and the entire federal judiciary, Mike, is going to sort of understand and apply the laws with all these upcoming battles about how states draw congressional lines and how votes are counted. So I think this case is actually a big deal in telling us where the court's going to be going on these voting right cases.
All right, next up, the issue of student free speech, whether Tinker versus Des Moines Independent Community School District, which holds that public school officials may regulate speech that would materially and substantially disrupt the work and discipline of the school, applies to student speech that occurs off campus. Mark, your thoughts?
Yeah, look, unless a student is making a violent threat, the student should be allowed to have, free speech rights under the First Amendment for things they say outside of school. I mean, in this case, the student was criticizing the process of, not being selected to the cheerleading team. But if you think about it, what would happen if a student went out on the internet and talked about how she or he was upset with the curriculum, what he was being taught? I mean, bear in mind, we have people like Greta Thunberg, who's a student, is out there supposedly taking the lead on climate change policy. So what would happen if her principal decided that they should kick her out of school or suspend her because they disagreed with her views on global warming, let's say? So it seems to me this is a big case, and students should have the right to speak as long as they're not, making violent threats or anything along those lines. They should have free speech rights like the rest of us.
Elizabeth, how do you see it?
Yeah, I think the court's going to try to find some narrow ruling here. There's a concern, obviously, about cyberbullying. There's also a concern about allowing students to have free speech. This isn't one of the First Amendment contexts like in the corporate context where there is a lot of division on the court, seeing the First Amendment being used to thwart union rights or promote corporate rights. This is one where I think the court will probably try to find a narrow way together.
So we got a big month ahead. I seem to recall doomsday scenarios laid out by prominent Democrats when President Trump selected Judge Amy Coney Barrett for the Supreme Court. We should get a better sense of what that court does in the coming weeks. Elizabeth, Mark, thanks very much.
Thank you. Happy Father's Day.
Thank you so much.